everybody. Thanks for joining us today on a podcast called Songs That Tell the Story. I'm your host, Cindy Larson, Cindy Dewey Larson, and I am privileged to interview Lavoy and Cleon Dewey in this series where we talk about songs from their long list of songs that they have written and the books that they have written. Today we're going to feature more stories from one of the books, and we're going to talk about an old classic song of the church. So this is going to be a really fun program. I'm so glad that you joined us today. For a complete catalog of the Dewey's music, you can go to deweyfamilyministries.shop. And we would love for you to take a look at all the just dozens and dozens of CDs and endless amount of music that spans many decades, and all the iconic songs that Lavoy and Cleon Dewey wrote, and all the stories that go with that are in books and in this podcast. So we're really glad that you found us and you joined us. So hopefully you're enjoying this. Let us know, okay? Give us some feedback and let us know what songs you would like to have featured if you don't see them in the archive. If your favorite song has not been something that we have talked about, you let us know. But today I want you guys to talk about some early years. I want to hear about some history here.
We're going to do something a little different this time. We're going to play on our horns a song entitled A New Name in Glory. And I was saved when I was 9 years old. Went to a camp meeting with my parents at Lexington, Nebraska. And I'll never forget, man, I mean, the preacher preached hot and heavy, and hell was, I didn't want to go to hell. I wanted to go to heaven. And so when the altar call was given, I went forward to the altar, an old-fashioned altar, wooden altar. But I didn't stop at the altar. I went around behind the upright piano and buried my head between the uprights of the piano as they were playing in the altar service. And there I cried out to the Lord and asked the Lord to, I had stolen a nickel out of an offering plate. And I had to ask God to forgive me. I think I'd got a pack of gum one time, and I felt so bad. And I just asked Jesus to please forgive me, cleanse me of all unrighteousness. And you had a very unusual conversion as well.
Very unusual. In fact, I believe I was 5 years old. And I was blessed to have a Downs uncle, great uncle.
Uncle John.
Uncle John. He's my favorite uncle, and I had a bunch of uncles.
Yeah.
But he was the undeniable favorite of mine. And he was called to preach.
Yeah.
And you may say, how could a Downs person be called to preach? God can use anybody or anything.
Right.
And he definitely was a preacher. He couldn't read and write. He could write his name in caps, but he would sometimes miss a letter or two. It didn't matter.
No.
Yeah.
And he loved God. His life was centered around God, and his mother wouldn't let him. This was back in the day when he was a little boy, when the men, and they were farmers, and the men would go out in the field, and sometimes they hired people.
Would this
to
be in
come
the 1940s or?
I was born in 41. Hello, I just told everybody I'm 30. Anyway, this would be, he was born in the
30s.
early 1900s.
Yeah.
Because my dad was born in 1911, and he was a little older than my dad.
Well, tell about
Wow.
Tell about him stringing the.
Oh, my grandparents had a cotton farm out in the sand hills, not too far from Littlefield. That's Littlefield. Yeah, because we lived in La Mesa at the time, but we would go to visit.
Okay.
And all the cousins would come in. I had a slew of cousins, and we all loved John. And he had a wheelbarrow, and he would say, "Come on." Grandma would say, "Okay, John, your chores are done." And he'd go get the wheelbarrow. All these little darlings like myself and my cousin, boy cousins and my girl cousins, and we'd all run to pile in the. And if you got in the front, that's the number one seat. I never did quite make it there. The boys beat us, but the girls usually were tackling. And so he'd run us around. He was very strong, very physically strong. And his favorite thing to do was what we call play church.
Yeah.
But there was no play
Oh.
for Uncle John.
Yeah.
And he was serious about it. He had some cord string, some cotton string. Is it cotton string?
Yeah.
And he he poked pieces of stick in the ground, and he did it the same way every time.
Okay.
Around close to this big tree, big elm. And we'd all come in there, and he'd drag in boxes and everything for us to sit. This was real church to him because, remember, he was called. It's
Yeah.
not funny business.
No.
And so he'd want us he'd play guitar. Of course, he couldn't really play, but I'd say, "You haven't changed the chord," and he'd move the chord and play "Jesus is the One," and he'd sing "Jesus one 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 one," and he just loved the Lord, and he loved us kids.
Yeah.
And so he always wanted he's worried about the boys because boys go to hell and girls go to heaven. So he knew he had to pray extra hard for those boys that done gone wild. And so he would preach, and he'd have an altar call. And we tormented him, we teased him, but it was not mean teasing. It was fun, and he knew we loved him. And he'd say, "I want you to raise a right hand if you want to be saved, feel a Holy Ghost, and go to heaven. Or I want you to get up and shout."
Yeah.
And I want everybody to shout. And so he'd close his eyes to pray, and some of us would raise our hand, or some of the boys, just the boys. I would never do this. Raise their foot. Raise their foot. He'd get so upset, and he'd preach them down about that, and you can't do that, and don't mock me, and don't mock God. And we say, we're not, John. We like you. And one time I was in one of these sweet little services, and another thing that I remember, there's so much, it's hard to
Well, that's why we got
interject
this
it all.
book, because we
That's
tell
why
all
we
this
got-
stuff,
But
all the little nitty gritty. So,
yeah, but I was going to tell you about.
well, go ahead.
He would bow his head to pray and close his eyes, and his little congregation would all scatter. And so he'd raise his head and look, and he'd be so mad, and he'd come and drag us back in there and set us down because he's going to have an altar call.
Oh, gotta
An
stay
altar
for the
call.
altar call.
And so but one of these services, God touched my heart.
Oh,
And I didn't remember it for a while.
Yeah.
When I went to Southwestern, Sister Kelly, our dorm mom, would sometimes, we had devotions in the evening, and the girls would sit along the corridors or go into this big room and sit. There were not chairs for everybody. And she would ask different ones to give their salvation story. And I never gave mine. And she asked me about it one time. I said, "Yes, I know I'm saved. I just was really little." And it was while I was writing this book. I was writing this book, and I was very prayerful when I came to the part about John, because I didn't want anyone to be offended
Yeah.
and think that I was laughing or making light of someone who was Downs.
yeah.
And I would never do that. I just have met so many in my life, and they are the most precious people.
Yeah.
But what I was going to say about his mother, she kept him away from bad language, or he was very innocent, like a 4-year-old. He had the mind of a 4-year-old, and clever in so many ways. But one service, I did raise my hand. I didn't raise my foot. I raised my little hand, and I cried. And John, he said, he prayed over me, and
Eclidi.
Cleety was my nickname. And so it stuck. And I went home that night, went into the big house, and my mother was tucking us girls into, the kids into bed. I said, Mama, something happened in John's service when we were playing church. And she said, what happened? And she was a little girl with John, too. He had the same services with that generation.
Okay.
And she knew what I was talking about. And she said, did you feel like crying? Did you cry? I said, yes, I cried and asked Jesus to come in my heart because I did things. I said, I put a pickle in John's false teeth sitting on his dresser. And he thought pickles were of the devil.
Okay.
so some of it sneaking there.
Say less.
And his and his false teeth were there. And so he just put that dill pickle there, and it just upset him. And he just really went to prayer for us, and I felt bad that I had hurt his feelings, and just I'm sure I had a bigger lesson than you did, and
I'm sure you did too. That's not a joke.
And Mother said, "Well, honey," she said, "I believe that you gave your heart to Jesus, and you're never going to be the same." And she said, "Don't ever doubt it." Mm-hmm. And I cried as I wrote that story, to think that God saved me through an imperfect person, which the world would deem as really useless, or why does God let people like that be born? I can tell you why he lets them be born.
Yeah.
When they're turned to God and they're taught the things of God, that's who they are and what they do.
Yeah.
Fast forward to our ministry. I started playing the clarinet when I was in the 3rd grade, and played instruments all the way through. When we started, of course, I nearly had this thumb taken off, and I promised God if I could ever play my horns, clarinet, saxophone, I'd play it and be faithful, so I've done that. And so we've chosen this song for a particular reason. We wanted to tell the story because the title of this old song we used to sing in church, there's a new name written down in glory, and I know it's mine. I know it's mine. And we took these instruments overseas, and I've mentioned in other podcasts that sometimes the lights would start going down in India, someplace like that, and we'd grab our horns and blow till our eyes were bugged out, and they like the up tempo ones. I mean, they like the ones that would get on with the program, and so we're gonna share this with you. I hope you enjoy it. There's a new name written down in glory. I mean, there's some banjo picking and going on.
Some pretty famous musicians that played on this track.
That's you and me and Susie playing the saxophones on this one, A New Name in Glory.
Hope you enjoy it. We'll be back in a second.
Yes, it's mine.
That was so much fun. I hope that you enjoyed that. We want you to be blessed today. Go and have a wonderful day. I don't know what day that you're watching. These come out every Monday, so every Sunday. So we hope that you had a good Sunday or
We have-
Monday or whatever.
We have four
We
instrumental
have
albums.
4 whole albums, and that was the start of many things to come, many stories. But we love you so much. Thank you for joining us on the podcast, Songs That Tell the Story. I'm your host, Cindy, and we'll be back again next week.